making that part of our DevOps journey, and they have just been wonderful. They've come in a number of occasions, and even out at Microsoft Build, we spent some time hanging out there. That was a lot of fun. They also picked up the tab for all the beer and the wine and the food, so round of applause. It was Boulevard beer, and it was not just Coors. I just want to point that out. So, Heidi's here. Thank you so much. I'll let you tell more about your background as you get into the presentation.
Excellent. Is my mic working? We're doing okay? Yeah. Awesome. I mean, we bought you beer, and I'm not saying that we're trying to buy your affection, but we also have stickers in the back. So my name is Heidi. I am a developer advocate for LaunchDarkly. That means that I get to travel the world talking to people about the coolness that is feature flags. And it also means that I get to go to all these conferences and get a ton of things just poured into my brain, and they mix around a ton. But one of the things that I'm excited about is how we can use feature flags to move faster. And for those of you who have not gotten 8 million reminders, the State of DevOps report from Dora is dropping this week, the 22nd. I'm like, can we just book a couple hours to just all group read this together? I think that would be great for the DevOps community. But I have seen previews of it, and the vast majority of it says a lot of what it said last year, which is we need to go faster. And I really feel like feature flags are going to give us an opportunity to go faster. So we had the most amazing way to do slides together.
It's going from that computer to that computer up to the screen.
Yeah, well, yes, but I'm in the wrong tab, so somebody needs to come save me. I'm good with technology. That's why they keep me put me on planes. There we go. So when people ask me what LaunchDarkly does, if my boss is listening, I say feature management. If my boss is not listening, I say feature flags as a service. Because that's really what we're offering. We're building out something so that you don't have to do it. Because I really believe that every company should be focused on and devoted to making the software that makes a business difference. And you should not be making software that you could buy from somebody else because it's not making a business difference for you. And that is a radical turn from where a lot of us started our careers, where we're like, I could build it all myself, it will all be unified, and we'll call it a monolith, and yeah, we're not doing that anymore. So let's not do that anymore. This talk is called Everything is a Little Bit Broken, and it's about how we're not really controlling all the things in our world. But software powers the world. Like, do we have any disagreements on that? I can skip this slide. Like, we know that.
Line is Tolerable.
Yes. But in the not so distant future, every human experience will be influenced by software. You got here tonight because you signed up on Meetup, because you followed Google Maps, because, I don't know, you might make a living in this industry. But you already know how much of the world is software, and it's going to get even more intense and even more pervasive in our lives. We don't see any reason that would stop. But new technology means that customer expectations are really changing too. I was super mad this evening when I walked out of my hotel and the buildings were tall enough that my GPS couldn't get a good fix, and I walked the wrong direction. Might also have to do with I have no sense of direction, but I rely on my phone to have sense of direction for me, and if it's confused, I expect it to know where I am at all times. If it's confused, I'm angry at it. Like, can you imagine 20 years ago being angry that your pocket computer doesn't know where you are at exactly that moment? That would have been outrageous, and now it's just like, yeah, my 10-year-old believes that, whatever. Every industry is shifting, even though our core industry, our core business value is not necessarily about software. All the ways that we execute that have to incorporate software. I think about long-distance trucking. We're doing all sorts of logging and route optimization with software. I think about plumbing. We're doing all sorts of really interesting things with cameras that can look in the pipe and tell you if it's like, maybe somebody flushed something they shouldn't, or maybe it's actually tree roots. Like, these are different problems. So every time we think about something, we think about the new experiences that we can have with it. When I think about software, because I come from a DevOps background, because I come from over 20 years in the tech industry, I have to say I don't believe any software is perfect. I think that everything is a little bit broken all the time. And the thing I say, and this isn't so bad for y'all because you didn't get on a plane to get here, every plane you get on has an error budget. There is a certain finite amount of broken that a plane is allowed to be. If it is over that amount, even if it is the latch on the overhead bin, they will ground the plane because it has exceeded its error budget. In the same way, we have to accept that our software is going to be a little bit broken all the time. It's going to be a little bit unresponsive. It's going to be a little bit sticky. It's going to be a little bit taped together because we aren't entirely responsible for the whole pipeline that we're delivering. We are ingesting things from other people, and we don't know where they came from, and we hope we're doing a good enough data sanitization job on it, but we can't be sure. So when you think about your system, it's not just your system that we have to think about, it's the systems of all the people who are providing you dependencies. Meeting customer expectations, these increasing expectations, is kind of hard. The one I laughed hardest about on this slide was the Hertz one, because I just told you to buy the things that you can't build, but it turns out that the worst of both worlds is paying someone to build something you don't understand. Don't do that one. But all of these companies have lost millions of dollars by betting wrong in a software sense. It's a real loss. It's not just like, oh, that was the wrong software to buy. It was a real impact on their business. Who here had to patch for Heartbleed? Yeah, right? Okay, whose fault was it that you had to patch for Heartbleed?
Google.
Google, maybe.
Their 3-page non-POC disclaimer that still is lacking evidence.
Yes.
Added millions.
Yes, so the problem is, there is a vulnerability in a chip that was designed like 15 years ago. And honest to God, as near as I can explain this to like humans who don't care that much about security, parts of the chip can psychically detect your secrets from other parts of the chip. I realize it has to do with like quantum effects and stuff like that, but basically, it can just guess right about speculative execution, what's going to happen next. That's not our fault. We didn't code anything wrong that gave us that vulnerability. It's the chip's fault. But how much stuff have we built on the chip? Okay, now it is our fault. Now it is our problem, even if it's not our fault. So when I think about how all of our systems are interconnected and deeply dependent, I think about Heartbleed because it was so deep and so pervasive, and we took, what, 2 years backward steps in computing speed to dial the systems down so that we didn't have this exploit. Like, we broke Moore's law. Wow. Wow, and that's a dependency that none of us could have done anything about. So when I'm thinking about how to like isolate and separate our systems, I think about that one a lot. So if you need to innovate, how do you provide more value faster without sacrificing quality? And this is the whole concept of Nicole Forsgren's book, Accelerate. Who's read Accelerate? Oh, people. So you only have to read the first third. The second third is like academic methodology. The last third is a really great case study, but you don't need it. Read the first third, because it is 100% about the faster you go, the safer you are. Which is so counterintuitive to everything we learned about software all this time. We're like, no, I want to check it. I want to be sure it's stable. I want to test it on pre-prod. I want to test it on QA. I want to test it on pre-prod. It's never going to production until I trust it. I think this is a little bit like teaching your kid to ride a bike. You take the kid who you love and you put them on a bike and you say, if you pedal fast enough, you will not fall down. And your child looks up at you wearing a helmet, missing some teeth, and is like, are you kidding me? I'm scared of hitting the ground, so I should go faster. Well, what we know, because we ride bikes, is yeah, you actually are going to fall down less if you go fast enough. But what they don't know is how that will make them safer. It intuitively doesn't make any sense. I'm here to tell you that we have a whole bunch of academic studies that essentially say the faster you go, the safer you are. And what do I mean by faster? I mean release every hour, release every minute. Never not be releasing. I mean, maybe you don't release all at once, maybe you don't release all the time, maybe you deploy all the time, because these are different concepts. Deploy is putting the code on the server. Release is showing people in the world what has happened, what the change is. You can deploy as much as you want, and if you have it behind a feature flag, no one is going to know. It's a secret deploy. It's a secret. It's not till you release that you have to admit that anything happened. So the way you move faster without sacrificing quality is to move faster. And those smaller changes make it easier to do QA, those smaller changes make it easier to roll back, smaller changes make it easier to tell what broke. All of these things make it easier to control what's happening. Small increments of change, small delta, so much safer than big delta. Who here has ever sat on a release bridge? Yeah? How do you feel about that?
Sleepy.
Sleepy. Cranky?
A little bit.
A little bit cranky. And why do we have release bridges?
Because people don't trust the release.
Because people don't trust the release. Why don't they trust the release?
Because they don't know what's inside it, and they're afraid of what's going to break.
Right. So it's a big ball of mud, and it could take down your system. Right? So we're going to do it at midnight on a slack time, and we're going to push it out to everybody on production. That's a great idea. Now, how about if we don't? How about if you deploy it to production and you don't do anything? And then you turn it on for 1% of people. And you watch your monitors. Is it spiking? Are people complaining? Is your Twitter channel lighting up? Like, how's that going? How about 2%? How about 10%? How about if we don't have a big bang release? How about if we just do a progressive release, progressive deployment, where we roll things out gradually and mindfully and test in production? Because the other problem with putting something on production, and the other reason we're scared of it, is because nothing is like production. Staging is a lie, a comforting lie that we tell ourselves so that we can sleep at night. But nothing is as weird, as big, as full of ugly data, as interconnected as production. We can't replicate that.
And full of people, right?
Yeah.
There's no people in staging.
There's no people in staging. They're not doing stupid things to your software.
Yes.
So I would rather, like, yeah, do your integration test, do your unit test. I'm not saying don't do testing. Sometimes people hear this and they're like, I don't have to test anymore. You still have to test, I'm sorry. But you have to test on production when you're ready to go, because staging is not going to give you a realistic expectation about what's going to happen. So elite companies don't trade speed for reliability. They're not going faster recklessly. They're going faster safely because they can see what's happening, because each change is individual. It's not a big ball of muck. It is controllable and individualized. This is from last year's DORA report. These numbers are not fake. Like, there's a whole bunch of mathing going on in the DORA reports, and they literally hire people to do this. But what we can see from this is that companies that have committed to doing CI/CD, to doing progressive deployment, to doing trunk-based development, they're moving faster and faster and faster. They are accelerating past their rivals. They're accelerating past companies that are playing it safe by going slow, because they are playing it safe by going fast. So you know some of these names, yeah? Yeah. When people are doing this, we don't ever notice their releases. They just happen. Like, magically, Netflix does a new thing. Okay. Magically, Amazon knows what it is I want to buy. I'm super confused. I have searched this week for both conspicuity tape, like the reflective tape, and washi tape. And now it keeps trying to find me conspicuity washi tape. It's not going well for any of us, but it's giving it a try. It's like, hey, people who have bought washi tape also want pens. Would you like fluorescent pens? That's like conspicuity. But it's doing this without ever breaking. It's doing this without ever having a problem. It's doing this without stumbling. Nobody has to like intelligently point the machine at me because it has time to adapt on its own. And then there's the people who have decided to stop being slow. And that's a big decision. That's a hard decision. Like, how do you decide to stop being slow? You're all in DevOps, and so the thing that you are trying to do with more or less success is convince your company to stop being slow. You're like, can we not have like the dividing wall where dev throws things over the wall to ops, and ops disapproves of them, and then puts them back in dev, and then dev ignores them because they're not cool anymore, and it takes like months to get anything out. All of DevOps is about, what if we all work together toward getting things out the door? What if that? These companies are doing the same thing. They're like, Microsoft is doing progressive deployment. When I say, what if you release to 2%, 5%, 10%, there's a setting in Microsoft Azure DevOps that does that, and it's possible we know some people who helped with that. So what's the common thread that is really doing this transformation push? What can we pull together from this? They aren't afraid to innovate fast because they don't have control. They can do both. They can go really fast, and they can control really precisely. It's sort of like the difference between going really fast on a bicycle, which is not a lot of control because you only have like this much contact surface, right? And going really fast in a sports car, which has big fat wide tires to hug the road. You're in more control, you have more control surface. That's the difference. What you need is not just going fast. Just going fast is in fact dangerous. Going fast with more control is safer. So these companies found a better way to deliver change and stay ahead of the competition. And it's all the things that you know. I can't teach this to DevOps. Like, you need to make things that people want to buy. It turns out that's kind of key to selling software. Make things that people actually want. You need to get the value in something under 2 years. You need to launch fearlessly. You need to be like, yeah, I think this will work. It's Friday. Pushing the button, setting the monitors, going home. If something happens and it goes wrong, it's going to roll back automatically. If something spikes my usage percentages, I'll just roll back that feature automatically. I don't even have to push a button. It's just going to do that. It's on a safety switch. Real-time control. So if it isn't on a safety switch, if you're sitting there watching it, that's even better. Like, what happens if I turn the dial up? What happens if I turn the dial down? Sort of like when your kid discovers the brightness on your phone. This has happened to other people, right? They're like, whoa! I want everybody to feel like that about their software. That delighted exclamation of wow about being able to turn something on but not break anything. And I want cross-team delegation. So who here likes to answer tickets that essentially boil down to, please turn the thingy on? How about if we make it so that the people who need the thingy on can do it themselves? What if I could give you the team that is actually deploying, the sales team? They want, these salespeople, right? They want new pricing again. I have no idea how much our product costs. I haven't known in like a year and a half. But that's okay. They have a system for this. They're going to deploy it. I have coded it all up for them, it's all ready to go, I tested it on production with some fake users. I never want to see this thing again. You take it, sales. I've given you the permission to turn it on. It's on you. Let me know if you have any trouble. But they're not going to have trouble because they're going to turn it on and it's going to work. Of course it's going to work. You tested it. It's built. You don't care when they turn it on. It's going to work. And then when it's been working for a while, we can pull the flag back out and not have to think about it again. That's just the new way it works. What we're trying to do with feature flags, with trunk-based development, with all of these go faster tools is move the locus of control. We need to spread out and distribute who gets to do deployment and release. We need to say who is actually at the business end of this stick. They should be the ones making the decision. It shouldn't be dependent on a server schedule or an ops schedule or a QA schedule necessarily. It should be dependent on the people who know about the business need. And the sooner we can do that, the more likely we are to make things that are actually useful. Because I've been on those teams where you work for 18 months on a product and you kill yourself hitting the deadline and you release it and nobody cares because you just made something that nobody cared about. How do you know? You're not a business person, you're a developer. You're sitting in a small room, the product owner, right? Who comes in and says, yeah, I'm the liaison with the users. You take their word for it, what the users want. You don't know. You know what I wish I had? I wish I had a way to see whether or not somebody was clicking the button. If only there was some way to instrument analytics, not only on the front end, not only like blue-green buttons, but analytics all the way through my funnel to say, hey, it turns out that every Friday, these people have a huge overage on their data usage. What's going on? Oh, it's really noisy because it's a football game. And they need to turn something down or something up in order for it to be useful. And nobody has ever seen them on Friday evenings because they're at a high school football game. So we don't know what they need. But the smaller we can make our features, the more controllable we can make them, the more likely we are to make what somebody needs. So we want to deliver the digital experiences that customers demand. We want feature management. We want to be able to say, this is what I want and this is how I want it. We want to build testing in production and canary deployments and targeted rollouts and make sure that people are getting things safely, make them quickly, make them useful. And then we want to operate them. I want kill switches and circuit breakers on all my external API ingestion. Like, you know that moment where you have some APIs feeding into your database, it's external data, it's coming in, it's pretty predictable. All of a sudden there's a 100x spike in the amount of data they're feeding in. What do you think happened?
Some feature probably went AWOL.
Some feature went AWOL or DDoS, yeah. Some kind of trash is getting written to your stream. I want to turn that off. I don't want to call the people up and say, yo, your API is feeding a bunch of trash into my database. What do you think is going on? No, I want to turn it off and then call them and say, yo, what's up with your API? No, I'm not taking it. Broke it. What's going on? Before I ingest all of that stuff that might be non-compliant with my standards, I want to say, here is all the things that I'm going to let exfiltrate. If it doesn't match this, right, I'm not going to let it out. You have firewalls for that, but the firewalls are mostly only for like absolute locking or alerting. And what I'm saying is, you can connect that to a feature flag system and have a control plane for all the things coming in and out of your environment without having to go find each one. and without having to redeploy. Because you know that thing when you're debugging and you really wish it were a higher log level, like the verbose logging, and you reboot it so you can add logging, and the problem goes away? And you're like, I wish I believed that that had solved the problem, that it was just a cranky toddler that needed a nap, which all apps are eventually cranky toddlers that just need a nap. But I would rather be able to turn logging up without redeploying, to be able to see what's happening in the moment without having to push something new out. I want to be able to learn and investigate and understand what's happening. And maybe, like, as a developer or as an ops person, I don't need that, but maybe I do. Maybe it would be super useful for me to understand what's driving these behaviors, to understand how the metrics are working. Maybe I want to do an experimentation with, like, different CDNs. Which one's faster? Like, how would you switch that? If you're going to send half your traffic to Fastly and half your traffic to, I've now blanked on all other CDNs, but Akamai, thank you. If you wanted to do that, how would you do that?
I would use Nomad.
You would use Nomad, that works. Does everybody know how to get into Nomad and control that, or would you like to have a switch for it? Would you like to have, would you like to have analytics that tell you how much faster something is, based on how many hits each one got? Because that seems like a great idea to me. Analytics aren't just for front ends. Analytics are for anything that you can control. I think it's super interesting that when Microsoft talks about what makes code complete, what they say is code that is complete is deployed and released in production and returning analytics. It's not complete until it's returning analytics. This just blew my mind. I'm like, all your code is talking back to you all the time so you can see what's happening. Because we so often have sort of a set and forget feeling about software, and there's no reason to have that anymore. We could be listening, we could be seeing hints and trends before they become catastrophic. And I want to empower everybody. I have an Ignite talk that includes Martin Luther and Che Guevara, and people are like, what do these people have in common? What they had in common was they really believed in universal literacy. They really believed that everybody ought to be able to read. And I really believe that everybody ought to be able to control features that are relevant to their job. Whether or not they built them, whether or not they have like a really high power level, whether or not they can deploy to production, you should still be able to control your feature in the environments that you're allowed in. Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to experiment with it. And I think most of us learn to code not by reading from a book, but from taking somebody else's script that already worked and putting our own variables in. Like, hello world becomes hello Smurf, Smurf Smurf, Smurf Smurf, or maybe that was just me. But that ability to change and alter and control is what teaches us so much better and so much faster than by the book learning. So feature management is going to accelerate your digital transformation because it's going to give you a control surface. It's like putting a DJ soundboard on your software. You can turn it on or off, you can turn it up or down, you can crossfade. Anything you want. I worry about this because I sort of like, I get too far into this and I'm about to start talking about happy little trees. So before we released like quarterly or monthly, release daily on demand whenever it's ready to go. Test in staging, which is a lie, for weeks. Test code in production without breaking production. Costly rollbacks and outages. Who here did a rollback? Yeah? Yeah, nobody admits it. I like that. Nobody loves rollbacks. Reduce mean time to recovery to seconds. This is one of the questions we get. How fast can I hit a kill switch? And as near as we can tell, depending on where you are, not Australia, less than a second. Like, if something's going wrong, less than a second until we can propagate that kill out. Because we're not distributing code, we're flipping a bit. It's very small, it's very light. Developers always owned a rollout, but maybe any team can control a rollout. Maybe we don't need developers for everything. Redeploy for configuration changes, yeah. Make configuration changes on the fly, like the logging example. And majority of time on risk mitigation, let's stop spending all our time on like what could go wrong and start spending our time on what we want to do. What could go right, what could be amazing. I'd rather work on what could be amazing rather than what could go wrong. So if software powers the world, Launch Darkly empowers all teams to deliver and control their software. And when we were talking about this in the employee meeting, I said, we mean all teams, right? And yes, we mean all teams. We mean front-end teams, we mean QA teams. We want all teams to have a say in how their software is experienced. So here are some of the things that we can do. There we go. It's a long slide, sorry. What we're saying is feature flags are not just a tool, or feature flags are a tool that has many patterns. And I really like to think about all the different patterns that we could use if we could control software. So like, I love the circuit breaker pattern because I have some trauma. I love the kill switch pattern. I love multivariate testing. Like not just, is this one better or is this one better? Because sometimes what I want is a menu. Sometimes I want to be able to say, are these 18, of these 18 things, which is the most popular? Okay, now if we combine it with, you know, here are the 18 entrees, here are the 18 desserts, what's the most popular combination so I can make more of that? I need to know that. I want to be able to see that. I think it's super powerful. I also, like, from my software tools, I have sort of minimum standards. I want to see what they're doing, and I want to be able to show that to a security team. Because there's nobody as humorless as security auditors. I think that's because they understand what could go wrong in the world. I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just saying no sense of humor. But I'd like to be able to say, here's what's going on, here's what happened, here's who has access to that, here's how I know they can't break that access, here's how I know they can't pop that, here's what happened. Because here's what happened is so much of our life. And when we talk about monitoring, and as we've started to talk about observability, we want to be able to ask questions. And one of the ways we can ask questions is by flipping flags on our features. We can say, hey, is this the feature that's causing that random like outage every 38 hours when it runs out of log file room? I don't know, let's turn it off and find out. You don't have to redeploy, just flip it off, flip it back on. hour 39 rolls by. Oh, okay, it was that. We need to refactor it. In the meantime, we can turn it back on and just deal with reboots every 38 hours. But at least we know now. Full control of your environment is an illusion. The thing that I think about with this is your car. Most of you drive, you live in Kansas City. You do have transit, but not that much. Yeah, most of you drive. You feel like you are in control of your car. Other people may come and hit your car, but you are mostly in control of your car, right? We're not going to talk about blaze ice. That's a different thing. I'm from Minnesota. I've had many exciting experiences. We're not, because as much as we feel like our hands are on the wheel, our feet are on the pedals, we are also at the mercy of the chip supplier, for the airbag supplier, for the company that put the airbags in the car. If that chip is faulty, the airbag goes off, we drive into something. It's not our fault. But it is a dependency chain that we live with because we can't possibly grasp all of the complexities that go into our life. We can't possibly see all the things that could go wrong, so all we can do is understand things may go wrong sometimes. So, what are we going to do about that? Error budgets and harm mitigation. If you know something's going to go wrong, what do you do about it?
Prepare.
You prepare. You make it the least bad that you can. If you know that you live in Kansas and sometimes there will be tornadoes, mostly you appreciate houses that have a basement. You listen to your tornado sirens. You remember that the first Wednesday of every month is testing and to stop freaking out. Maybe that's just me. But you say, I allow this percentage of things to go wrong without freaking out. Because I need to have a little wiggle room in my error budget to be able to take things down if they need fixing. I need some room for there to be slop. The most tightly engineered system in the world is extremely fragile. The more optimized, the more efficient something is, the more fragile and prone to breakage it is. You know this because you've tried to get children out this door to school in the morning. So how much failure is tolerable depends on what your risks are. If your risk is, I might have to drive my kid to school instead of the school bus, some failure is tolerable. If you are a person who is in charge of flying planes, being late is really not on. That is not okay, that will get you fired. So you have a different level of risk about being late. So I can't tell you how much failure and how much risk tolerance is appropriate for your computer, or for your computer, for your company, for your organization, but you can. You can say, how much can we tolerate? I want you to reduce catastrophes. And the interesting thing about a catastrophe is that it is a series of bad things that happen. Catastrophe is never just one bad thing. It's never just like, oh, it was cold out and therefore the space shuttle blew up. It was cold out and therefore the O-ring was too small and the liquid leaked out and we hadn't really tested that, and like there was a PowerPoint presentation that demonstrated this risk, but it didn't rise to the highest levels of management, so people didn't understand. A catastrophe, it takes teamwork. Catastrophe takes teamwork. And what I want is for you to have circuit breakers and isolations and points of control so that instead of having the dominoes just keep falling down, you have some places where you pulled out a couple dominoes and the domino chain stops. Where you can say, stop. This system has failed. It's not allowed to take down other systems. I've walled it off. I've blocked it off. I've turned it off. There's no connection. That's bad. That server is on fire, but it's on fire over there, and these servers are not on fire. And I want you to have control points to say, this is where the problem is. I once spontaneously invented Git bisect on 4th of July weekend while trying to get the Microsoft Tuesday patch release notes out. I couldn't get the thing to compile, and I'm like, okay, does the first half compile? How about the second half? Okay, the first half is definitely broken. Is the first half of the first half broken, or the second half of the first half broken, right? I'm like, I was so pleased when I found out that was actually a thing that people get taught in computer science, but I had to invent it for myself. But what if I said, if you really can't troubleshoot something, if you really can't debug it, you can put enough flags on it so that when you turn it off and it works properly, you know where the problem was. That's so cool. Like, what if I could give you that kind of control? And rapid rollback. Rapid rollback is, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you deploy something and it seems like a great idea, and you start to release it and it seems like, oh shit. It seems like something has gone very wrong, and your servers are making that sort of overheated noise. And who knew that that could happen when you were on AWS, but it can. And it's really the sound of your cost just incrementing, sort of like a gas meter spinning. You want to be able to say, stop. Whatever I just pushed is not okay. I don't want it out. Turn it off. Hit the kill switch. So I also want layered access. Like, I'm all for democratizing what people have, but I also don't want any yo-ho pushing things to production unless they have permission to do it, unless they understand why we're doing it and how to do it, have been through possibly a very boring training on what we're allowed to do. So what I want is for people to say, this is what's going to happen, these are the people allowed to do it. No one, not even the CEO, no one gets to turn on a feature live. Like, no, you just don't get to code on production. You have to put it through the CI/CD pipeline. And I have now rejected any attempt to do live on production changes. That would be great. That seems super. So only authorized users make changes. There's a whole set of HTTP response cats. It's really worth looking up. Abstractions manage change. Every time you hard code something to something else, it's really painful the next time you need to change either side of that.
Right.
Instead, what you want is an abstraction that says, I expect data of this type from you. You're a black box, I don't care what's in you, but I expect this kind of data. Having that kind of abstraction layer not only means that it's easier to deal with the couplings between different kinds of software, but it also means that you can put control points on it and say, yeah, you're a black box that's giving me bad data, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Or you're a black box that I only want this kind of data from. Like, stop sending me all of those garbage status headers, I just want the content. Whatever you want. But having that layer of abstraction gives you so much more safety and control, lets you move faster. My friend Tanya Riley gives a lot of great talks. This one she gave at Lisa in 2018, and I think it's really useful when we're thinking about points of control and DevOps. Everyone's back end is someone else's front end. Whatever you're doing, there's somebody who thinks that that's not as technical as what they do. And there's somebody who thinks that's unbelievably technical compared to what they do. And I'm here to tell you that that's all true. Like, our layers are so deep that everybody from electrical engineers designing chips to people who are doing drag and drop page design, they have front ends and back ends that they have to deal with that they consider easier and harder. And when we remember that, it gives us a lot more room to understand that everything is a little bit broken, but we can still decide what we consume, what we have, what we need, how it goes. That's what I want. I really want you to have more power. So if this was too long and you read Twitter instead, depend on nothing, because eventually someone will let you down. Assume good effort. Everybody is doing their best to meet the contracts and the promises that they have given you. And I mean promises in both the human sense and the computing sense. And prepare for failure, because it doesn't take much for something to fail, but if we stop failures while they're young, they don't have to become catastrophes. And I didn't bring t-shirts because I so hate lugging t-shirts, but if you take a picture of this slide, you can go to a website and order a t-shirt and get a 30-day trial of Launch Darkly. So I'm going to hand off to Seth, and he's going to tell you about somebody who's using Launch Darkly in the wild. Where did the mic there?
Is this working? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Seth. I'm in sales at Launch Darkly, and I work here, love talking to salespeople. So I'll be very brief. One of our customers in KC was AMC. They're not actually in KC. It's in Leawood. It's like 20 minutes, I think, that way. And I just want to tell you a bit about how the good people at AMC are using Launch Darkly. So they have this really big, awesome, cool new thing that they are going to release, which I can't tell you much about because it's an NDA. However, they have this new cool thing. It's big, it's giant, it's awesome. And it's very scary for a company that was founded 100 years ago to just go and like release it and make it live. And so it is in prod, and they have let a bunch of their executives play with this thing, and they can use it and try it out and get the feedback internally, and they can then go open up externally in a small scale. This is not the problem of how do we avoid catastrophes. This is the problem of how do we, if we're going to invest an enormous amount of resources in this new thing, how do we make sure that it is going to be a success? And now we go and get the feedback and course correct before we are live and we're in the medium. So they're using this right now. It is the blocker of prod. It is in production, but it is not released. It is released to a small number of people. It will then go and release it a little more, and then at some point in the coming X amount of time periods, you will hear about it, and hopefully, if all goes well, there will not be the problems and the hot fixes and the redeploys, because they had a system in their code that allowed them to deploy to production, to test in production, to release it on a limited basis, to then go and get feedback, incorporate their feedback into the product development lifecycle, rinse and repeat. And so by the time they do go and release globally, they already have the confidence that A, this thing is working because it's been tested and prod by us, B, it's working because it's been tested and prod by actual people, and C, that we know the feedback is good because this is the feedback we've got. So if you want to talk more about Launch Directly, myself and Heidi and Dan, who was here but is not, will be here afterwards. If you just want to go and drink beer and talk amongst yourself, it's already paid for. Please drink it all. Please eat the food. Please get a doggy bag, and we'll be here afterwards to chat.
Dan went to go grab his machine. He's
Yeah.
going to do a little demo of the system and stuff. So grab a beer, and then when Dan gets back, he'll walk through the portal and some other things. So
Great. Any questions, by the way, about anything we've talked about?
So I have a question on more. I love the philosophy. It was awesome. I thought the statistics were really interesting on going faster, reducing risk. But the first thing that pops into my mind is how does it work? How do you do it? Is it Java instrumentation, and then that creates like some sort of JSON that has a list of all the features? Do you have to upload all your code to launch Darkly?
All right. No, that's a really good question. I didn't cover that because I tried to keep this a sort of generic, useful philosophy thing. But in terms of Launch Darkly, what happens is we have 15 SDKs now. So you are going to load the SDK on your side. You're going to instrument your code with a little code snippet that Dan's going to demonstrate for you when he gets here. And then the SDK scoops that up and presents it to an API. And you can either control the API directly, or you can use our console to control it. So it is, I think of it as Schrodinger's code. Both states of the code exist in deployment. And what happens is dependent on the flag evaluation. So it means that it's very lightweight, and when you make a change to how your code should evaluate, then that gets pushed down, but not the whole piece of code, just the different behavior, just the different evaluation. Because both the A and B variants are already there. Does that make sense?
So there's a bunch of potential jar files sitting on the web server?
Well, it depends on, they're not usually the whole jar. Like inside your jar, there's an if else, like feature flags are nothing but a really fancy if statement.
Okay.
So wherever you would put an if statement, that's where your feature flag lives.
Heidi,
Yeah.
I mean, if people aren't familiar with the solution, you want to talk about how it's a SaaS-based solution,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how you want to, you guys are just basically maintaining the keys and the triggers, right?
Yeah.
The rules.
We're not.
So I appreciate the, not doing a vendor thing,
Mhm.
but I go for it. Like, we want to see this.
This is
because
what
it is,
this is what Dan is going to do.
It is conceptually really hard for us to grasp, and
Yeah.
very few people are in this space, so we want to see it
Yes.
for sure. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I'm happy to answer it. So what we're doing is we are helping you control your code, but the control points live in your code, and what happens is basically a query when your app instantiates to say, hey, what have I got? What have I got to work with? What am I doing here? Who should I let in? And then it just continues to follow that rule. People often ask me what happens if we're doing SaaS, what happens if Launch Darkly goes down? Like, this is the #1 question. What happens if Launch Darkly goes down? the same thing that happened the second before Launch Darkly went down, because all of that logic is local. Like, some of it's server side, some of it's client side, it depends on the architecture of the language you're working in, and a bunch of other things. But the logic doesn't depend on Launch Darkly to evaluate.
And it has default responses in it, so
Right.
it has a fallback. If it can't contact the server, it'll fall back to say false.
Okay.
As a default. Additionally, you can bootstrap it too, so you can bring down all the keys locally. So if it does ever go down, you have the opportunity to access it locally.
So what languages do the SDK support?
15.
Yeah, there are 15 of them. Java, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, C#. I think we're still fighting about Erlang, you know. But we wrote it, it's mostly in Go.
Okay.
As you might expect from a modern SaaS provision system. Other questions, or I'm just going to keep answering frequently asked questions until they
I'll ask them while this is coming up. So as you can imagine, we do a few calculations around here.
Yeah,
right?
one or two. Yeah.
One or two, yeah. So I can conceive of feature flags, you know, in like the web app side. I can even, on the back end, I can imagine where you would do those things. Is there any way, what are your thoughts about how could you utilize that, you know, with calculations? Because calculations oftentimes, you know, if it's wrong, it's not because you've got failing code, it's because you have a calculation that's calculating wrongly, you know. Any thoughts about, you know, if there's a way that you could use feature flags in that kind of space?
I think I am not understanding what you were saying.
So we have a tax engine, right?
Right.
And so we build code
Right.
that calculates taxes and
Mhm.
things along those lines. If I wanted to wrap a feature flag around a new calculation that I was going to roll out, it seems like I'd have to know that it was right through my testing process, because I'm not sure that, I mean, I guess I could turn the new calc off with the feature flag if I somehow discerned that it was calculating wrongly.
Right. So one of the things you might do there is synthetic testing.
Okay.
So you would say, okay, I think this new calc works. I'm going to create an identical user to the one that's going to go through the system, but it's going to be, you know, fake user, and I'm going to try each kind of calculation and see if I'm coming up with the answers that I expect. And if there's a divergence, then you know that there's something you need to go address.
Yep. Okay, cool. Dan?
All right.
Hey folks, this is Dan Tachi. I'm a solution engineer at Launch Darkly, so thank you all for having us here today. I appreciate if you like no vendor sort of rah-rah sentiment. If we are being goaded into a demonstration tonight, we will gladly comply, of course. I'm also personally glad that I've only had one of these Tank 7s because they're surprisingly strong. You
can have at least 3 or 10.
Well, I mean, I've moved on to the hazy American Classic at this point, which I think was a very safe and prudent bet on my part, so that the remainder of this product demonstration wasn't too sloppy. But in all seriousness, I'm happy to demonstrate what we got for you today. I'm going to show a .NET example. Is that a language everyone's more or less familiar with, or would we appreciate like a different language?
C++.
Oh.
Yeah, everyone's like shouting out a bunch of it, like literally every other language. So I'm just gonna. I could do Java.
Python, Java.
Python's the go-to. Python's the go-to, the lingua franca of the development community. Okay, we can do that. Not a problem at all. In fact, we will. Yeah, I've got. Well, my app that I'm about to show you is actually written in Python, so that's great. So we're about to actually show you the real from what comes from an app. So just to get started with you guys today, it's like, so you've already got a rundown from Heidi of how this is actually going to like affect your life. I'm personally biased, but I was also a developer prior to working as a solution engineer for Launch Darkly, and realized, like, you know, first and foremost, exactly how this has affected my life. So the answer is significantly. So I was one of the people that was called on pager duty at 2 a.m. and had to work on Saturdays, and was permanently embittered for that. So here we go. So Launch Darkly, of course, has a 15 SDKs, as I think it was shouted out. I actually didn't even know that number myself. We were going to focus.
Keeps moving.
Huh?
It keeps moving.
It keeps moving. Yeah, that number it keeps. Is that large enough? Can everybody sort of see that? My eyes are not fantastic, so yeah, I can zoom in a little bit. It's going to affect the resolution. Really, what we're going to be doing the microphone, or
It helps for the recording.
for the recording. Got it. Really, what we're going to be focusing on for this application is utilizing this variation method introduced by our SDK to leverage the power of our cloud-based offering, right? And that's what really we want to help empower you with, because this is what's going to separate your code deployments from your feature releases. And as we know, this has sort of been sort of a tied together thing, historically speaking. You release a feature, you hope you pray, you cross your fingers, that everything's going to work okay, and you hope that it does, and if it doesn't, you panic, and you get on the phone with operations, and your development's halted, and I get paged at 2 in the morning, and then I have to work on a Saturday, and then everyone's life's a mess. So what we can do instead is wrap our code in these conditional statements, right, and harness the power of a cloud-based rule set in order to dynamically configure and create a centralized repository for configuration files, YAML files, JSON files, etc., rather than relying on the old way of managing this and hoping that everything just kind of works out for the best. So to demonstrate this process today, I'm going to utilize this Python-based app. So glad that somebody's shouted Python. I'm going to use a combination of Python server-side SDKs as well as a client-side JavaScript SDK, just to show some of the speed and how some of this process gets delivered utilizing our architecture. I want to keep it conversational. We've got a room full of people. I've also had, I'm also on Peer 3, so if anybody wants to jump in and have some questions in a more technical capacity that isn't completely derail the entire conversation, please feel free to do so. But without further ado, this is going to be a quick look at the main app, the main web-based app here. Because we value developer centricity here at Launch Darkly, all of our SDKs are open source. They're all on GitHub. You don't have to worry about some magical black box that's ruining your performance. If you don't trust me, which that's up to you, but you can go ahead and scope that on GitHub and see for yourself, right? The other thing that it kind of proves, I hope, some of our developer centricity is that this entire GUI, this is a React app that we made in-house, is based upon the exact same REST API calls that we make available to you. So anything that you're going to see here that I'm doing in this React app can be done programmatically via our API. So, that's kind of awesome. Also, our documentation is excellent, and yes, I'm tooting my own horn, but prove me wrong, I dare you. So one of the first things I want to show, again, this is how it generally looks, but I will zoom in a little bit, even though it looks a little worse zoomed in, just so that hopefully we can actually read some of this text. Is that zoomed in enough? Yeah. My eyes are not great. I should probably be wearing glasses. Good. Okay. I hear kind of resounding yeses. So we create these feature flags, right, for a variety of reasons. But the main one of them, as already has been described tonight, is that we want to be able to separate our code deployments from our feature releases, and then be able to start targeting either on one user or a cohort of users, an entire segment of users, or the entire population. You have that power, you have that capability to do so when it is time to do so, okay? So, typical scenario that you may or may not have, I come from a web development background. That's kind of where I'm most familiar. So one thing I'm very familiar with is deploying my code, and the marketing team wants me to deploy it at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. So that is, of course, the last time that historically operations would want to actually deploy something, right? So they want to deploy at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night when no one's actually using the site. Marketing team says, no, we want this exposed to our maximum exposure to coincide with our email campaign. Is this scenario anybody's familiar with besides myself? Yeah, sure. I'm seeing some nodding heads over there. Wonderful. Or not so wonderful, it depends on your scenario. So,
Angry nod.
Angry nod. I love angry nod, by the way. That is actually the most encapsulating response I've heard yet. So I, as a developer, have been working on the process of this new checkout for our homepage. Marketing's hoping we're going to have a better conversion rate, there's going to be a better click-through ratio. They want this released at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Everybody's panicking. I've been working with the back-end teams to get the APIs correct, the front-end teams to get the UI correct, the UX teams to ensure everything's viable, and our design teams to get all the assets designed in time. And we launch it, and we say the famous statement of, well, it worked in staging. And so we push to prod, and there's performance implications, there are bugs. Everyone's pointing their fingers, QA's pointing over here, I'm pointing at literally everybody else. And at the end of the day, we have to get this off. So we talk to our operations team, and we have to get this thing mitigated as fast as possible. All right, that's a problem. Unless you wrap in a feature flag, right? So rather than getting on operations and stopping your entire development for your next sprint cycle, what we would then do is wrap this widget right here in a feature flag. We would find our underperforming feature, which in this case is show live tiles. We would turn it off. We would say write a panicked bug in prod as a message, and we turn this off, and within 200 milliseconds, problem solved. Ooh.
Yeah, usually people are noisier about that.
Yeah, let's get a little noisier about that. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
You can do that all around the world.
You can do that all around. So this change is received across all devices and SDKs within what we like to tout as 200 milliseconds, or as I used to say, well within a second, right? So very fast.
How does the push function work?
Great question. Aircraft, ladies and gentlemen. He's heard this once or twice before. So we utilize a protocol called server-side events. It's a HTML5 W3C spec protocol that came out. It's essentially a push notification. It's a server-to-server communication that works equally well with server-to-client communication. It is not a WebSocket. WebSockets imply a network response. We just broadcast this out like some magical radio tower. And this gets received, again, within 200 milliseconds across all devices in the SDK. So let's see that. Now, imagine, instead of having to roll back our entire application, we just apply a hotfix whenever we felt like it. That is done, turn it back on, and boom. It's back on within our system, right? I am hearing like a slight clap right there. I appreciate your soft clap. It's endearing to my heart. And so this is one of the things, like, this is what...
That's cool.
Don't give him the giggles, he'll never recover.
Yeah, I'll never recover. It'll be over. I already had a chance at it. It'll never recover. So what happens here, folks, is that, so this allows us a couple sort of benefits right off the bat, right? So that we get to push our code out. We get to at least deploy our code, whether or not independently of actually releasing said feature. And once it's released, it gives us sort of an immediate recovery option should we choose to wrap it in a feature flag and recover that, right? We also have the ability to determine who this should go out for, right? So one of the concepts Heidi was talking about earlier was this notion of progressive delivery, which is something we find really important. Facebook came out with this concept of speed as a habit and they taught to move fast and break things, as it were, or not break things. I wouldn't say move fast and break things, but do it safely. So what we like to do is roll features out, but just put it in production. Like, staging is a lie. I couldn't agree with Heidi more. Why waste your time doing all this QA effort and all this testing effort unnecessarily on pre-prod and prod? I once worked, no joke, at a company that had a 5-step to production process. It was just as nightmarish as it sounds. I never want to go back through that again. I wish I could time travel today and like save past Dan Tachi with Launch Darkly from the ensuing difficulties that he had. But what we can do today is mitigate some of that functionality with some of our systems, right? So we don't have to just broadcast. We don't just need to have our system on and off for everyone, right? We have the ability to test it only on yourself, or only on your internal users, or only on an internal cohort of users. And that, in that capacity, we can then test in production, with the same environment variables, on the same database production load, with the same code base as everyone else is going to see when you actually need to go ahead and meet the arbitrary marketing demands of releasing at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. So let me give you a quick look at what this might look like. We can see here using the same example. I'm currently logged in as trial with an arbitrary number that I created for demo purposes, but they are from the state of Texas. Let me go ahead and log in as myself. I'm from California, Oakland, California. That's where LaunchDarkly is based. Love it out there. And imagine now, we can see here that I'm showing the slide tiles, but unless you meet the criteria that I've established within our rules engine, so I've officially whitelisted guest@gmail.com. The other users that can see this feature have to be within the state of Texas and California. Everyone else is getting false. So let's go ahead and verify that. I'm gonna put this mic down. Go. Sign in, throw in a little incognito mode. And I'm gonna sign in as Seth, who's in this room, whose password I would change to something remarkably insecure. And you see here that at this exact same time, Seth is not getting this particular bit of feature functionality, whereas I am at the same time, right? So we're gonna have different criteria for different folks in this room at the exact same time that's happening. So some of these criteria could be state, or it could be application version, it could be server address, right? So if you only want to test on yourself, you could say that your IP has to be 127.0.0.1. Right, if you want to test on your local dev, test it just on yourself. You can test it just on people that just have a specific app version, or on a cohort of users that are perhaps internal users or from a beta user segment, right? So this is the way that I want you to start thinking about software development and feature releases. It doesn't have to be this nightmarish capacity that ends with you at PagerDuty 2 a.m. in the morning, or working on Saturday because people decide to deploy to prod on a Friday afternoon. Your life could be better. It really can be. Like, we are living in the future right now, and that's a pretty magical moment. So there's a huge deep dive. I give presentations like these all the time to all sorts of folks, like Eric Kraft from H&R Block, who's, thank you so much for hosting us again, and a horde of others. And I mean, we could go all sorts of depths in varying degrees and questions. I see a question right over here, so let's keep them coming, because I mean, I could literally go for hours on any one of these topics, and for your sake as well as my own.
So forgive me if you covered this when I stepped out. How do you go about pruning stuff like so? Was that already covered?
No.
Okay. Because that's
She knows what's coming.
What's that?
She knows what's coming. That's why she giggled. Please continue.
Because like I totally get the go forward, like we got the legacy way and the new way type of thing, but over time wouldn't that just like balloon out? Like how do you keep that in control?
The concept of technical debt.
Yeah.
Wow. If only some sort of company had thought about some of these procedures and had some sort of solution for that. Well, my friend, boy do I have something in store for you, because we thought about that. So we embrace speed as a habit at LaunchDarkly, right? So I don't think there's too many objections to moving faster, to testing more safely, to being able to deploy to production without the whole world like exploding in some, hellfire. And the question I think that is being asked right now is, what happens with the technical debt created by littering your code base with a whole bunch of conditional statements invoked by a third party but charming like folks like us, that might, what happens then, right? What happens after this thing that used to be a feature branch that you just pruned with a quick terminal command and git, now lives forever in your code base? Well, LaunchDarkly has thought about some of these issues. So we have this concept of statuses that shows you a quick visual indicator of where your feature flag is within its own lifecycle. If you create a brand new feature, it's always going to be off by default. It's going to have this new sticker, and that's what's going to give you that confidence to actually push this thing out, to actually deploy your code, right? Because you can know that even if it's not ready, even if you're waiting on an API, or even if you're waiting on an arbitrary marketing deadline, you can push this thing out and it won't actually be released anyway. So that's the new feature. Active or inactive shows you that this particular feature is receiving evaluations or not, one way or the other. And there's this concept of the launched status. And this is a really great indicator that you've hopefully adopted this notion of progressive delivery. You tested it on yourself and your other developers. You rolled it out to your internal users. You rolled it out to your QA team. You pass it off to product as no longer being part of your concerns. You just don't care anymore, whether it's going to your beta testers or whether it's going to random states or whatever how it might be. And eventually this thing has gone out for several months and it's been rolled out to everyone, right? And it's now working flawlessly, just as you expected, because you're the world's greatest coder and you don't have to worry about bugs or something misperforming. And now it's set out in the wild for 3 months, and you're ready to go ahead and prune this thing, right? So traditionally, this would mean just like cleaning up your feature branch because you're never gonna have to go back to it. In Launch Sharply, there's this concept of the launch status where it says all users are receiving one variation of this flag, and you might be able to remove it from your code. It's a good candidate for removal from UI. Now, we're gonna go ahead and take that one step further with this notion of code references. So this is optional, completely optional, but if you authorize it via personal access token, assuming you're utilizing Git, which pretty much everyone in the world is these days, utilizing a CLI or something like GitHub Actions, you can scan the commits to actually see if there's a feature flag key referenced in any of these commits, and it'll tell you the exact file name and the exact line number of where these feature flags are being referenced, and you can just go ahead and just pop it right out. It really ties up the loose ends there. Does that answer some of your questions?
I will add that there's also a slick thing that when you write the feature flag code, you can git stash the code to remove it at the same time while everything's in your head. So you write the flag with its if statement, and then you write the version that removes it and just git stash it and not commit it, which is a really great new GitHub feature. I'm loving it. And then when you're ready and this shows you where it is, you can just go remove it. Poof, just commit it.
That's cool.
One other sort of technique is actually making multiple PRs and having the first PR just be just the function as it should exist in its final state. So for example, if it's just running this like show feature function, just having a separate PR as that and leaving that as its like trailing PR. And then you can test it, roll it out, and then when you're ready and everything's exactly as it's intended, you revert to that other PR, which just has that function, which doesn't have the conditional statements around it, and utilize it that way. And again, code reference is going to help you find exactly where that's being utilized. Yeah, cool. No? Maybe.
Yeah, this is cool stuff. Do you guys use LaunchDarkly for the LaunchDarkly site?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why wouldn't we? That's crazy talk. Of course we would. Yeah, so currently right now I am being beta tested on right now. So we are in the process of rolling out a new experimentation offering that's a little more fleshed out. You can do A/B end testing. You can pause and restart your metrics. We are actively looking for beta testers for this program, but I, of course, as a solution engineer, am part of that beta test. So when I check out some of our I'm getting this new experimentations feature, right? This isn't GA yet, so we are getting it ourselves. We also utilize LaunchDarkly. One of the cool quick anecdotes that I will share with you guys is that we used our own system to migrate off MongoDB without any downtime in our system. So what we did is feature flagged our database connection. This is sort of like a reasonable facsimile of how we did it, but the entire process was a little bit more in depth. But we would start writing our records to our new database just to ensure that it was getting records written to. So we wrote to two databases concurrently, just to ensure that the records were being written. Then we wanted to make sure that the rest of the performance of our new database was working as intended. And as we saw that we were writing to both these concurrently and that both of them were working nominally, we started throttling our traffic, utilizing our percentage rollout feature to start writing the new traffic to our new database, and then slowly increasing that until we wrote to 100%, and then we just turned off our old database with absolutely no downtime.
So rather than going into the UI and having to toggle things on and off,
Yeah.
Where would I go to set things up so that I could automatically tie into an App Insights or whatever, monitoring tool of choice to flip things off?
Yeah, so we have customizable webhook interfaces, and we also have a variety of first-class integrations. In LaunchDarkly, we have ADO as one of our integrations. You can utilize LaunchDarkly straight from ADO, which is pretty nice, or various application monitoring tools. If we don't have a first-class integration, we have a very customizable webhook set that you can create notifications on. User in the gingham in the back.
Yes, we had, it's on the previous question of if we go and use our own service. So there was one time, and we had a customer who started giving us copious quantities of garbage, that they were sending so much crap to us, and it was coming a lot more quickly than we could spin up resources, and it was going to take us down. And so by using LaunchDarkly, we got to make the painful but ultimately good decision to go and kill this one customer and shut them off temporarily. And that made them unhappy. But the alternative was they were going to take down everything. And so this is one of the cases of we took out a couple dominoes in the train. We shut down this one customer. We talked to them. We got stuff figured out. And this wasn't the space shuttle in space where the bad thing happened and the other bad thing and then bad things really happened.
Cool.
Which database did you migrate to?
I forget, 'cause I'm pretty sure it's Postgres, but we have several, and I forget what that particular anecdote was referring to, but the main point is that it was off Mongo. This is really like the takeaway.
But that's web scale.
Oh, you're nice.
I already asked one.
Heidi was talking about, so we've seen all like front end stuff here. You talked about the back end, like database connection one, but like what about the CDN example? Like how we want to test performance between like Akamai and CloudFront or something, how would you like bring that into conceptualize like the feature flagging for like things that are external to your code base or something?
Sure. You have that as you utilize it like, in simple terms, kind of like any other. I know that's sort of like downplaying in a lot of ways, but really since we exist at the top of your application stack for server-side SDKs, by default, LaunchDarkly is going to return true or false, but you can also have it return strings, numbers, or even JSON object. So you could have that string be like Akamai, or have your JSON object be some sort of API endpoint, and utilize it that way. That also gives you the option to dynamically configure it, which is pretty nice. And I can't stress enough the advantage that having something like having a dynamically configurable API rate limiting brings to the table.
Is a lot of this stuff cached in case like your SaaS goes down or something?
What a question.
That's a great question.
What a great question. It's like you're talking about the talking points straight from our website, which I really appreciate. The way our product works is that LaunchDarkly by default will require a hard-coded fallback value. And when we've established an initial connection to LaunchDarkly, it will pull down a kind of stateful world as a JSON object for what that currently exists, and it will persist that in your application memory cache. All these evaluations occur in your application. So it's like when it gets down to this feature flag component, it's not like there's an outbound call. That'd be crazy to introduce like horrible latency. It happens at the application level, and it just refers or essentially cross-references a locally available rule set. And so even if your connection is cut off, and it's a really common pattern, especially for mobile devices, right? So it's like if you're utilizing our Android or iOS SDK, and you start your new app and you're in airplane mode, or you were just flying from California like I was, and you never have the opportunity to establish that first connection. Now maybe you have this, you'll just default to the fallback value. If you do have at least one connection, you will then refer to your local memory cache and then update as necessary. SDK as a heartbeat, etc.
Are there any plans for kind of like a run your own version of Launch Darkly, or would you always have to keep success?
No.
There is a number. There is a number that we would take to do on-prem. It's a very large number. When you do on-prem, you lose a lot of the advantage of the worldwide updates and a lot of the advantage of having us run it, because then you have to be maintaining that all the time. So we find that most of our customers, even ones with high security needs, can find a satisfactory solution with our service.
I will add like a little asterisk to this, is that if you are not entirely disconnected from the state of the world, or instead like working on an air-gapped model where you have like intermittent connectivity, we have a really interesting use case from an Australian company that operates these trucking sites, but they go so remotely that they don't have connectivity for about 12 hours a day. And you can read flags from a file, from like a JSON file, or you know, if it's a local web server, like a Redis store, something like that, and utilize that as sort of the source of truth, and then update it periodically when you have the ability to do so. And the nice part about this is that even if you have only limited or intermittent connectivity, maybe you can only update once a month or once a quarter, you'll still be running on the last known good version and still have the capability to do the same amount of user targeting or the same amount of granular user or flag evaluations that you would be able to do so, and then update those rules as time allows.
Those are some pretty good docs. I was wondering, back in the UI, there was a thing at the top left that looked like choosing which app. Can you just like switch between different apps within like an organization?
Oh, organizations.
Yeah. I'm sure some people would love to hear about that.
Yeah. So Launch Darkly is organized first at the project level, so it's typically mapped to like a product line, and feature flags when you create them are scoped to the project, so that's such that any environment that you will create within that, local dev stage or a variety of individual users like we have here, will have access to the same feature flag. It's just that the state is going to be different. So if I'm running on my own local dev, that's going to have a state independent of prod. So I can test in staging and do whatever I need to do, test my heart's content, and then when I'm ready to migrate that to prod, we have a pretty streamlined solution to do that with this compare flags functionality. So imagine I was like testing this out, everything was working great, I'm ready to move this to production. We have this compare flags functionality that's going to find any discrepancy within these flags. It's going to show you some visual cues of where those discrepancies lie. And then if you drill down into this, you can see how the rules differ. So here this is an individual user key that's identified by hash. You can see that I'm also targeting this particular rule based on the states of Texas and California, where myself and Seth are from respectively. And if you're ready to do this, you can just copy the settings over and it'll just port that over straight to prod, which is really nice.
Using that though, you could, with your test and prod model, staging could be a virtual environment.
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. Like, and that's what we want to like strongly advocate at this point. I can't stress that enough. But we also realize that some people aren't quite there yet. In fact, the majority of folks aren't quite there yet. So, I know. This is a huge shock to everybody at a DevOps meetup, but that is the case.
We do have customers who are paying for their Launch Darkly license by having gotten rid of their staging environment. Yeah. Like the money they saved running staging, they just pay us.
That's ROI, baby.
Yeah, we have a lot of customers in the business of streaming. So we have NBC, Hulu, Fubo TV, iStream Planet, Sling, the Dish Network. They've got very expensive staging environments and tertiary environments because they have a whole lot of load streaming a whole bunch of video. And so for them, being able to not have all of these environments that are very expensive to maintain means they have money for other cooler things.
And they're all using LaunchDarkly?
They're all using LaunchDarkly. There's one of others too that don't give us permission to talk about it, but those do.
So just to make this like slightly less LaunchDarkly based, right? All the sort of tech giants that you know and love, Facebook, Netflix, etc. They're all utilizing some sort of form of in-house feature flagging that they've thrown millions of dollars at, and you don't have access to because it's proprietary technology. And so we
That's why
came
we don't love
along.
them.
Yeah,
I can't wait for them to get broken up.
Preach on, brother. I preach.
They will have a chance to make some money, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna let him
Ridiculous.
take the next talk, by the way. This is amazing. I couldn't agree more. And so we're just here to kind of democratize that process. That's it. So they're utilizing it, and the takeaway here is that you should be utilizing it in some facet or another, whether that be us or, you know, trudge through that homegrown solution process.
We love it when people bring us homegrown solutions. We're like, you built your own, you now understand the value, and we'll take care of it. We got you.
Yes, I'm wearing Docker socks tonight. Yes. So.
How does this hybrid in with, like, if you want to do like percent releases, like something like Istio or things like that? Is it
Great question.
You have like 4 cases in any 2-case scenario, right?
Yeah. The question was how does this interface if you want to utilize something like Istio? How does this interface with that? So the concept is we exist at a slightly different layer. So we're really the application layer. Istio is more the infrastructure layer. You can utilize Istio to do something that we traditionally call a blue-green deployment. So you're essentially recreating your entire model, your entire instance, a slightly different version, right? And you're going to separate as at the infrastructure traffic layer who's getting which version. You need to then host both of these versions and run monitoring to see like how they are being actively received, right? So if this is an infrastructure concern, that's absolutely the way to go. If you want to test a new like reverse proxy, if you want to test a new like I don't know, deployment cluster or something like that, that's a great way to go. However, a lot of people have been abusing that notion because they're trying to actually test feature functionality. So if you're trying to test feature functionality, then don't make it an infrastructure concern. Make it a feature level concern, right?
Right, but there are still the 2 concerns, right? So you would get in a case where you have your feature on, feature off, but that could be spread across new infrastructure concern and old infrastructure concern, right? So there's 4 cases. Is there a way to like interface with and like tag and say only go to my one side of my new or old infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. As we saw like briefly in that, I made like a quick rule set based on IP address. This can be expanded massively. We have a really excellent case study by Michael McKay from IBM, who's utilizing LaunchDarkly to determine how his Kubernetes deployments should be, what clusters should be deployed orchestrated by his Kubernetes deployments. We can go, well, I'd love to send you the documentation over that. He's going to describe it way better than I possibly could do the justice of doing so, but he gave a keynote speech at Trajectory, which is our conference over in April. And it's a really great explanation of how to do that. So these 2 powers are absolutely complementary to each other and not competitive at all. Great question.
I have one more.
You're back. Kicking it up.
I have to think of another one.
What calls in the running today, everybody?
So let's say it's not like just JavaScript front-end code or something that can react to change. But you can't like receive a superset event. Like maybe it's a back-end code base, I guess. And it can't receive a push notification. I can't open up my ingress from you. Can I like poll to see if I should do something?
Most of our value is going to be derived from the server side. I mean, I utilize front-end examples just because it shows very pretty. And this is a DevOps meeting, so actually probably should have just opened that terminal and just like had you guys like check out like the logs that pop up when I make a change. I'm apparently not. I know. I'm apparently not speaking to my audience. I'm ill prepared. Apologies. That's on me. You're going to get the most value from this product from the server side, at operational level, at the server side level. So you can change models, views, controllers, whatever it needs to be, database connections.
But that's what the proxy server setup is for, isn't it?
We also have a relay proxy, so if you need to manage the number of outbound connections via Launch Darkly, and you'd prefer to have that just be through one outbound connection, you can proxy all of that through, and it's just a Go binary that we've created. We also have it as a Docker container. Yeah. In the back.
I just, so the groups you're defining, I have two questions. The first one is, you can do that off of Active Directory, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then the second, when you're talking about pushing lots of deployments without really notifying the user community, just always being deploying, when you do a deployment, does it kill all the sessions that are currently attached, or does it slip in?
No, it does not.
Okay.
So great question. So Launch Darkly is completely agnostic as to where this information is being populated from. It could be from Active Directory, it could be from Postgres or MySQL databases, it could be from a JSON object, it could be from a session cookie on the front end. Launch Darkly really doesn't care. You just need to populate it with some sort of information and then tell it what sort of attributes are available from that source.
You want to show it in the source code?
Yeah, let's take a quick look. Since we're all Python aficionados, this is the actual models.py that I'm running for this demo site here. This is my app user interface. This is picking up the user. You can see that these are the attributes that I'm passing from my Postgres DB. I have user type, account type, state, country, app version, company, date, and plan. I also identified account type and state as private attributes. So because this gets evaluated at the application level, there would otherwise be a asynchronous like reporting stream that will buffer some of this user data back to Launch Darkly if you so choose. You can also dictate that any or all of these should be marked as private. So if you have personally identifying information, private information,
Don't
etc.
send it to us.
Just don't send it to us.
We don't want it.
We don't want it. We're not in the business of data processing. We don't want to be. It makes our like. Really, we don't care. You think we want to hold on to these logs? You know what these cloud-based AWS builds are like? It's just out of control. Just don't send it to us. We don't want it.
Can you show where you like declare one of the features? Like I saw there's like tags in the UI. You have to like
Sure.
have an object somewhere that registers as a client or something?
I have a variety of them in this particular bit here. Here's beta features. It's really just this variation method. So here I'm calling this dark theme property. So this is kind of like the idea, the concept behind it is that some certain users want to be able to see our new beta theme. We're dark skinning and everything, just sort of like a newest version of Spotify and OS X and everything else. And I'm calling this on our current user, get user, LD user. So that was that same model that we looked at right here. Get LD user. So at the server level, you can create multiple user types or user objects. Commonly, we will see at least one in-app, like logged in human user, and usually also like an operational user context, right? So if you want to dictate something at the start of your application, you want to dynamically configure the logging level, you want to change some database connections or throw something into maintenance mode at a quick switch, you have the capability to do so. And then we can also define a separate user object that might be like a human user that would be interfacing with the client-side focus of your app. Again, this can all be populated from the server. But really the magic is going to come from this variation method, and that's just indicating to our SDK that this platform is available, that you should leverage it, that it exists, and that we should determine based on this user context whether or not to show a given bit of feature functionality. One more question.
Do you have any strategies for funneling things down to the next layer down? Like say I want my internal users to bypass the application firewall or use a different lookup or something else. Maybe I want to use a different mail server because it's going internal or something like that. Do you have anything, short of putting both of them side by side, is there anything a little more concise that helps there?
I'm not entirely sure I understand or like how to sort of get an answer to that one. You help me understand the use case a little bit more?
Well, give the example of the CEOs, you know, and you don't want them to they have to go through all the security checks, or you don't care whether or not, you just know that they're inside the sanctioned area, so just skip all that. Is one example. Or
I mean, we could do it at the individual user level. That's a very like common pattern right here. Like in this dark theme, I might like
Only people under 40.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe you want to cite in crash logs from beta users into a certain area versus the regular place where nobody else cares. Maybe you have a different server set up to deal with those. Maybe there's going to logging instead of.
I mean, as long as it exists within the like server application context, there's no reason we couldn't utilize the variation method from our server-side SDKs and call it out. It does have to exist within that layer. Obviously, if it's outside the scope of that layer, you know, how much it's got to exist within an SDK that we support or language that we support. Otherwise, there's no reason we couldn't use it. Sorry, I don't have like a better answer for that, but I'd be happy to explore that too. My email is daniel@launchdarkly.com. Happy to like carry on this conversation.
What's the behavior if the key doesn't exist on there, the feature flag doesn't exist?
Yes, the typo scenario where you misthemed as a draft theme, that will fail. That will fail because we can't help with that, right? So if the key doesn't exist, what will happen is it will go back to the fallback value. So that is considered a
Successful failure.
A successful failure. Thank you, Heidi. I couldn't agree more. This is exactly why we mandate hard code values and why we strongly encourage users to test on yourself first to ensure it's working. Because if you accidentally, you know, made this as draft theme, when you went to go test it, it would not appear. And if you just test it on yourself first, that's a great way to minimize the exposure of this against, you know, a typo or any other key error that might be involved. Sure.
On the topic of resiliency and failures and self-healing, what are your thoughts around, I think it was Amazon or Netflix's chaos engineering theory that they designed failures into production so that their teams would respond, and they worked out issues like when the server went down and they went to call the teams involved, they couldn't all get into whatever group chat. Little things like that that were worked out so that when failures do happen naturally that weren't caused by, I think it's Chaos Monkey is the little app. They've been through it all the way and they're not going to hit unknown obstacles.
I couldn't be more for it. Like I think it's fantastic. Actually, one of our strongest partners in this app is Gremlin. If you're familiar with them, they actually helped sponsor our very first conference Trajectory earlier this April.
They do chaos as a service.
They do, yeah, exactly. That's the thing. But they're awesome and amazing, and we love them. And it's a very like, you know, there's a lot of reciprocity in our love. So yes, I would highly recommend checking out Gremlin. They're our friends in the chaos engineering department, and I think it's a fantastic way to help mitigate the eventual failures that will happen one way or another.
They will happen.
They will happen. It's a question of when, not if.
You hired a team, you know, to respond to these, so you would hope that the guys you're paying are going to respond to some incidents.
Couldn't agree more. Shameless plug for Gremlin. They're great. Check them out.
Anna Medina spoke at our conference last year.
Mhm.
Check out our YouTube for DevOps KC. It was an awesome talk, and Gremlin really was good.
You're an MC.
Was that?
Are you an MC?
No. I like movies.
No, I was at
Any other questions? One in the back.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So you said testing, if you have a set of feature flags, you want to test them in an automated fashion, now you create a large permutation of possible code bases that could be run through. How do you account for all those different test cases, and how do you in an automated way reach all the different feature flags during your test automation?
Right, so.
Reach a goal before you're running out of them.
Right. The thing that, oh, thank you. The thing that we get a lot of pushback on is if I put in feature flags, how am I going to have 100% code coverage for my tests? Like, how can I make sure that everything is getting tested? And the answer is very few of us have 100% test path coverage anyway. So a lot of what needs to be tested is already being tested sort of as it exists. So the recommendation that we make is that you test your known good state, your stable state, and you would think if it was known good, you wouldn't need to test it, but you need a baseline. And then you test it with all the new flags on to make sure that they don't conflict. But you don't need to do each one. The UX person was explaining this to me, that there's basically a batch testing where you're like, okay, we're gonna try all these things. If any of it breaks, we're gonna break it apart and figure out which ones need help. But right now, we're just gonna test them all. The other things that I've seen people do are all on, all off, delta new, on, delta new off.
How does that work from an automation perspective?
From an automation,
or something like that?
yeah, from an automation perspective, there are all sorts of things that you're already not testing.
That can't be an excuse.
Well, it can. Like, you can test everything, but it's going to take time and cost money. So what we have people do is say, from an automation standpoint, I'm going to test at 5%, and then the automation will ramp it up after that. Like, so when you're saying automated testing, take me, which kind of automated testing, because there's like 18 kinds.
CI/CD pipeline, right? So before I
Okay.
deploy, I want to make sure I run a test.
Right.
The test, unit test, integration test, yada yada.
Right.
And those are automated tests off the pipeline, right? And at that point, they need to test a path that potentially will get deployed, right?
Right.
So we say the default state, but when it goes into production, that state might change. So I want to test that change ahead of time to make sure that the new path is also tested, that we have coverage for the well-expected new state that we will deploy once the feature's turned on.
Right.
Those need to be changed to the feature flags when we talk during the testing and say, hey, I tested with the feature on, without the feature on.
Right. So I think what I would use for that in a CI/CD sense is that I would have a brief staging stop, which is not necessarily.
That's not automated, then,
Yeah, but like if you want to do full up integration testing without anyone seeing it, you have to do it somewhere. I would do it on production with a very small percentage of users. But for an automation purpose, like you can automate the progressive deployment. You can say, you know, roll out 2% an hour until it's done.
Well, it's an API call. I could say, for instance,
Yeah.
in the middle of your test automation, you could say, hey, I'm done with one test suite, now I'm flipping those switches, now I'm
Right.
testing again, and so on. I mean, it might be an option, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would look at, I don't have like the most beautiful, elegant answer for this, but I would look at, Willie Peter Schaub did a lot of work on this for Azure DevOps. And he has a lot of CI/CD experience on how they got it working.
Anything else?
Right. Are we good? Can we play? Yeah. Well, you talk, stay and talk to these guys all night. There might be more beer outside. I don't know.
Please drink the
I
beer.
really hope so.
Yeah.